We just got everyone in, so those people trickling in. Feel free to turn your camera on if you'd like to, but we ask that you remain muted until the networking portion of today's call. But good to see you all. We're going to give everyone just a little bit more time. I don't want to take too long because we have a jam-packed schedule for today. But just a few more minutes as everyone trickles in. While we're waiting, be sure to drop what you're drinking in the chat. What coffee do you have going today, or tea, or flavored water, or whatever? Drop it in the chat. We want to know. Awesome. Okay. Well, I don't want to waste too much time because, like I said, we have a big schedule today. So for those who don't know me, my name is Shayla Bohr. I'm taking over for Kate Wallace, who is feeling a little under the weather and can't really speak right now. So I'm hoping I'm doing her justice here. So just a quick reminder that Kate asked me to remind all of you, the Irvine Security University registration is open. It is March 11th and 12th. I am in the Northern California region, so I'll be going to that one in Sacramento. But for those of you in SoCal, get your registrations in soon. It's always a good time. Questions during the program, please make sure you put them in chat. I will be monitoring them and Kate will be monitoring them, and we'll do our best to sprinkle them in. We'll have some Q&A time as well at the end. This is a really exciting topic, so we know that you have some comments and some questions along the way. Feel free to share those. And with that, I am going to hand this over to our my co-chair of the Ambassador Committee. Probably should have said that. I'm Shayla Bohr. I'm co-chair of the Ambassador Committee. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. I'm going to pass it over to Ashley Cervantes Thomas, who is my co-chair as well, and also vice president of the CalSAGA board. So she's going to take it away, but if you have anything you'd like to share, as always, please put it in the chat, and Kate and I will be keeping an eye out there. All right, Ashley, over to you.
Thank you so much, Shayla. That was such a warm welcome. It is so exciting to see some new faces, some familiar faces. We never know what the turnout for these kinds of events is going to look like when we broach a new topic that we haven't yet tackled as a committee or as an organization, or really there's no space that we're having these conversations as an industry yet. So thank you all for being brave enough to be here and engage in this dialogue and have this conversation with us. I am very excited to introduce our speakers and our panelists that are going to be talking with us about this important conversation and this important topic in just a moment. But before I do that, I am going to ask Kate to go ahead and launch the poll. As per usual, we always have a poll to sort of get everyone's brains working and to give everyone an idea of who's on and who's engaging. This is especially helpful for our panelists, so we'll share those results in just a little bit. But I wanted to say thank you for everyone coming in and showing up today, because this conversation is a really important one that we all need to be having. So on that note, I am very excited to introduce Blanca Bradley, who is an LCSW trauma and EMDR specialist. And for those of you that are wondering what EMDR is, well, I am no expert. I did do a little bit of homework to understand the acronym is Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. And it's this really cool, newer, from what I understand, therapy to help folks recover and heal from trauma. So trauma is definitely Blanca's area of specialty, and we are so fortunate to have her on today as part of our panel. And if you were raising an eyebrow and wondering if Bradley might mean she's related or connected, not at all. Not in any way, shape, or form. I'm joking. Our very own Barry Bradley is lucky enough to call her his wife. So we are just so thankful that we get to pick her brain. My company used her, and she wrote a whole training for us on mental health for the security industry for my officers within my security company, and she did a phenomenal job. And so I wanted to bring that here for all of you to get a little snippet so we can start having these hard conversations. Our other panelists you'll definitely recognize, newly elected to the board as one of our regional directors, Tony Benavides, and he is a retired law enforcement and mental health for first responders advocate. He does mindfulness and meditation as an instructor, and he's also the director of training with Guardian Security Agency. Many of you attended his workshop when we did the breakouts at the annual conference this year. It was so popular that everyone in the group actually ended up staying long past the end time, which meant you all were skipping out on free alcohol to hang out with Tony and listen to his thoughts. So that's a big testament. Once all the other groups had concluded, Tony's group was still going strong, and I know that it has a lot to do with his background, and it's such a unique perspective that it has. So we are very fortunate to have both of them on as panelists today. And so, as per usual for Coffee Chat, I'm going to give you all another moment to wrap up your poll and quiz, and then we're going to share those results, and then we'll dive right into it. We have about 11 questions. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but we're definitely going to do our best, and we'll get started in just a moment. Kate, are you able to close down the poll and show us the results? So this is really helpful for our panelists to know who is on today, which category do they fit in? And we gave them some different options, but it looks like the majority of folks that are on are owner operators. So definitely the majority of who you're talking to is going to fall into that bucket. And then the second highest is going to be those operational managers, the folks who spend most of their time out in the field. So that's really helpful as we're sort of you're crafting your responses today, to keep that in the back of your mind. We also asked who would be interested in a formal session on mental health for security at a future CalSaga event, and 100% of everyone on today said yes. So the audience that you are talking to, Blanca and Tony, is captive, right? They are focused and they are here for this conversation. I love that. And then the last poll question that we asked was, what do they hope to get out of today's coffee chat? And so there's some mixed results, but the majority of them said all of the above. So I'm just going to read through what everyone is hoping, or what the majority of folks are hoping to get out today is everything on this list. So they have no idea where to start or what they're really looking for, but mental health sounds important for our industry. They need to begin the conversation around trauma for their team, but they don't know how. They don't know where to start that conversation. They're looking for resources to support their field staff with regards to mental health. And they're just not quite sure where to find those resources. So luckily, I think if today's conversation, if we're able to get to all these questions, we'll definitely address all of that. And then nobody selected this as an individual option, but everyone who selected all of the above, they're also just here for the coffee. So as Shayla mentioned, please don't forget to drop your name, what regions you serve, and definitely what you're drinking, because that's a big part of our coffee chat tradition. Don't worry, I'm sticking true. It's a little melted because I was dealing with an employee issue this morning, but I have my traditional iced, no matter how cold it is. I think it was like 37 degrees outside when I left my house this morning. So it doesn't matter. I need all the ice, extra ice, in fact. So that's what I'm drinking. On that note, without further ado, let's get into it. So you all heard me introduce Tony. This first question is for you. Can you walk us through a real life example to begin understanding the neuroscience behind what's happening in the brain during high stress situations? I'm really hoping that you can walk me through an example from real life, maybe, to help us understand what is happening inside the brain in those high stress situations.
Yeah, so happy to. The reason that I think that this is important and why we need to talk about what's going on in the brain is because for a long time, and I was in law enforcement for 23 years, and I got out 2 years ago, but I've still work with first responders is 25 years ago we saw some of these responses as a moral failing, or somebody just couldn't hack it, or whatever the case was, whatever you wanted to call it. They were weak, they couldn't hang, whatever it was. And we didn't really talk about what was really happening in the brain when people are exposed to stress, either acute stress or chronic stress. And the difference between acute stress and chronic stress is acute stress is something happens to you right now, today, and your body reacts to it. So just to use Ashley, this is a perfect example. Somebody walked in today and quit on you, and that caused you some acute stress. If somebody did that every single day, that buildup would be considered chronic stress. And I have a little bit of so I have a diagram that I want to show you real quick. I want to use this one. And there are essentially, I'm going to really, really oversimplify this, but there are essentially three parts of the brain that you see here that are involved in stress and stress management. There's a lot more that's going on, but these are the three parts. This amygdala that you see, this is the first place that is reactive to stress, and that's your fight, flight, and freeze response. So as soon as, and it's your first responder, your amygdala is the first responder of your brain. So as soon as somebody comes in, okay, so let me give you an example that I had, but I really, actually, do you mind if I keep using your example? Is
Not
that
at
okay?
all. Yeah.
Okay, 'cause it's really relevant, especially since there's so many owners on the
Yeah.
call. I have some good ones, but I can share those also over drinks at the next conference too, or at Security University. But this person walks in and they're angry. Immediately, our amygdala gets engaged. It says, "Okay, I have a threat," because this isn't a physical. It doesn't always have to be a physical threat. Sometimes it's just a psychological threat too. And so you have this psychological or physical threat. Immediately, that amygdala sends messages to different parts of your body and says, "Hey, reduce some stress, release some stress hormones for me." And those stress hormones get released, and they flow throughout your body, and they do things like reduce salivation, shut down digestion, thicken your blood, send all your blood to your vital organs. It's getting ready for some kind of attack. Your brain still doesn't know always whether it's a psychological or a physical threat. So it has the same response. It doesn't have really two separate systems to deal with somebody who's quitting on you and somebody who's attacking you. The intensity is different and the results are different, but the basic processes are the same. The next thing it does is it goes to our hippocampus. And I don't expect you to remember all these names. I just want you to understand that there's a process here. It sends a message to the hippocampus that says, "Hey, you're responsible for storing solutions to problems that we've had. Do we have anything for this?" And the hippocampus can send a message back to the amygdala and say, "Yeah, you got it. This is what we do about this." Or it can say, "No, we've never seen this before. Let me ask the prefrontal cortex. They're our problem solvers." And the prefrontal cortex solves the problem for you, or starts to formulate a solution. Sends that solution to the hippocampus, says, "Store this for later." The hippocampus sends it back to the amygdala that says, "Hey, stop producing all those chemicals. We don't need them." And then the amygdala shuts down, and we start to calm down a little bit. Well, the problem is that if we have too many of those stress hormones, either through acute stress or chronic stress, or we can't break that loop, then the message can't get out from the amygdala to the hippocampus or the prefrontal cortex to say, "Hey, can you solve this problem for me?" Um, and so the amygdala only knows how to do those three things: fight, flight, freeze. So that's what you're going to do. Now, that can happen in acute stress, but it can also happen in chronic stress. I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills this month. My mom is sick. I have to move back in with my parents. My girlfriend left me. My alternator broke. All these things cause this chronic stress and this buildup of these stress hormones, so that when you get on site and you say, "Hey, can you tuck your shirt in today?" Somebody just, "Oh, why are you always messing with me? It's just a shirt. I don't believe this. This is a terrible place to work." Whatever it is they say to you, we've always experienced that in the field. And that's probably somebody who's experiencing chronic stress, and whose stress hormones are so high that they can't get messages out of the amygdala. So they're just in fight mode. with you. So I wanted to talk about this because I think there's a real um, process going on here, and it's not a moral failing. It's something that we can manage, and we can get in the way of some of these processes by breaking this pattern and introducing a pattern interrupt, which we can talk about a little bit later. And I'll stop sharing. I don't expect you to remember all those brain parts, and I way simplified it. So if there's any neuroscientists in the room, I'm sorry that
I
I
love that, Tony. It's a lot, but as we begin to sort of a picture and imagine as a person who regularly interacts with employees and with folks out in the field, I am sort of starting to picture why that officer, when I was like, hey, you're late for the third time, I'm going to have to write you up for this and we're going to have to document it and have a conversation when they blow up at me. And I'm like, why are you blowing up at me? It makes it sort of make a little more sense and we can begin to unpack and start to understand. We don't know what's happening in everyone's personal life. And when we're not able to sort of name these things, I think it becomes much harder to deal with and to process. So that was really helpful. Thank you, Tony. Anything else you want to add on?
Yeah, just that you were you have to do this, right? But you were the 10th person that dumped that caused this stress response today. You weren't the first person, you weren't the only person, you were the 10th person, maybe this week, whatever it is. So the other part about this is that we just can't take what I want you to take away from this as well is that we can't take these things personally. There's something happening inside this person that if we want to keep them, we have to sort of help them deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say, that we're all going to be therapists after this 1 hour coffee chat, but our goal today is definitely to give you some of the skills, some of the context to start to understand, and then the skills to sort of identify and then to respond. And we're going to go surface level, but hopefully we'll get through all of that. So my next question is for you, Blanca, as the trauma expert on the call. Security professionals are often exposed to traumatic situations. One of the things I shared with Blanca when I begged her to please come share her wisdom with CalSaga, was that I think oftentimes it's overlooked that security officers are truly the first responders a lot of the time, right? We're the ones who find the dead body. We're the ones who witness the fire to call it in. And while now today in 2025, there are some resources being shifted and it's being identified that law enforcement and fire has to have these conversations. They have to start talking about mental health because, the mental health rates of mental health crisis happening in those communities are just staggering. We haven't started talking about it for security professionals yet. And so one of my questions for you today, Blanca, is how can the industry better address PTSD and trauma-related mental health issues? Like, what do you have for the folks on? You have a lot of owner operators, a lot of field management on this call. What do you have for them?
Well, first of all, hi, Ashley. Hello, everyone. I want to first just thank you, Ashley, and your ambassador committee to bringing this important topic to, your chats, and hopefully, given on the results of the survey, the poll, it will be more on a bigger stage. So I think this is an important topic. And for all of you who are here today, this morning, um, should be very proud. I know it, we have a lot to cover. And the question you present, it's not that easy. I can't just, kind of say, hey, okay, do X, Y, and Z, because a lot of times you really have to understand a little bit about trauma, right? And Tony did such a beautiful job in explaining, the neuroscience, regarding acute stress and chronic stress, so I'm just going to lead a little bit with that and then I will answer it, that question. But when chronic stress happens, it's when your brain and your body never gets a break. You're overwhelmed. It's like constant, right? Which then can lead to this I'm exhausted, I'm burned out, I'm anxious, I'm depressed. And sometimes it can turn, that stress can turn into trauma, can turn into PTSD, right? So your security officers, and not just your security officers, but management, owners, we all have bosses, right? Owners, your clients are your bosses. Supervisors, you have your team under you. So you're all reporting to someone or answering to someone. So what happens is it's recognizing those signs. And I did share with Ashley a list that I believe that will be shared later, but some of the signs that to be out on the lookout for, right? So let's say, an important thing is when someone experiences a very distressing or overwhelming experience, that experience is personal. So your trauma is personal. Just because one person sees it or experiences that it's a trauma, another person may not. So let's say you have two security officers handling or responding to a call, right? Let's say they're patrolling a shopping center. There's an act of violence or something's, like is happening. One officer may the experience may really be felt in their nervous system, as Tony explained, and that experience is basically hijacking their nervous system. So they go on, it could show up in days, weeks, months, like they're reliving that experience. They're in that moment. The other individual, hey, may have processed it, may have dealt with it, and it's fine. Two individuals experiencing the same event but differently. So it's understanding and that it's very personal. No two people will experience it alike. Also, is not assuming that the individual needs help, right? So let's say there's a crisis, an emergency happens. It's offering the support, right? Because and I know we have a question later that we could get into, but as far as like, hey, I noticed that you're a little off, especially if someone who is like very engaging, very talkative, always shows up, always that one person to volunteer to work extra hours. And all of a sudden, this person becomes withdrawn. Their hygiene is pretty off. Their uniform is like dirty, and he's not, or he or she is not well groomed. Constantly calling out late, right? So you start seeing certain things happening, and the individual is checking in with them. Hey, I'm noticing, something's off. How are you doing? Is there a way for, how can I support you? And then we can also talk. I'm going off because I know there's another question that's coming up as far as like owners not, like still being supportive and honoring the company's responsibilities and goals. But when it comes to trauma, it's when the brain experiences something that just overwhelms, and when it doesn't fully process it, then that's when it can turn into PTSD and develop those symptoms of, flashbacks, hypervigilance, depression, and so forth. That it's just trauma is just not about what happened, but how your brain and body responds and stores that experience.
I think that's a really helpful note, right? Trauma is not just about what happened, but that personalized experience, like how your individual body internalizes it. And every person is different. So that, while that seems overwhelming on the one hand, I think on the other hand, I think what it opens the door for is that communication, right? And I think that's what's so important about the post traumatic event process and that cycle. When you know your officers have been exposed to something on duty, like we need to open up and have those intentional conversations. I think that's so helpful. I did ask Blanca to put together like a checklist and some helpful information, and she provided some amazing things. So Kate's gonna see if she can put something together for everyone who attended, because there's some really helpful resources there that I think everyone could sort of take and store in a folder, so that when, it's not if, but when something traumatic happens on your watch, you'll have that resource to pull from. And I think that's incredible. So Blanca, thank you for doing all of that work.
And Ashley, I just wanted also just to jump real quick on what you mentioned earlier about security officers, security professionals being that first responders. That is so true. You know, and I'm seeing a lot more conversations about mental health, you know, with first responders, right? With law enforcement, with the firefighters, with the healthcare industry. But to this date, I have not come across conversations regarding the security industry and how mental health impacts the security industry. And I'm familiar with Cal Sega. You know, I do have my little connection. I think that is something that is so important to bring to the forefront, to have those conversations, to normalize the talks around mental health, right? The days of like, you know, suck it up, buttercup, those days are gone. You know, it's like, bless the new generations in many ways, you know, our millennials, our Gen Zers who are asking, are wanting to know, are saying, hey, it's okay to take care of your mental health, just like you would take care of your physical health. There's no shame, and we need to remove that stigma, that shame about talking about, hey, I'm having a hard time today. And it's just
Yeah.
not work. Like Tony said, it's can be compounded, but outside stressors also. So, you know, so that's my take.
No, I think that's so important, and it is cultural, right? It's both cultural to who we are as individuals and our own communities, but it's also industry specific, right? I think the rates of suicide in law enforcement and in fire are staggering and heart-wrenching to understand. The rates of alcoholism and divorce are just through the roof, and they're being studied in those spaces. They're not even being studied or looked at in our industry. So we don't even know, right? And so I think it's such an important conversation and dialogue to begin. And we're not going to get through all of it today because there's just too much. But our goal is to start giving all of you on this call some exposure, number one, and number two, maybe if we even just put one golden nugget, as one of my favorite speakers always shares, Mr. Barry Bradley, or one tool to add to your tool belt today. That's my hope and my objective for today's call. So Tony and or Blanca, whoever wants to tackle this one, what are the warning signs that we can watch out for in our associates, be that our management team members, our security officers, boots on the ground out there in the field? What are the warning signs that we can help us identify that they may be struggling with burnout, with mental health, with trauma that maybe hasn't been resolved or processed? What do you have for us?
Um,
Um,
uh, uh,
yeah,
do you
please
want
go
to
on.
go, Tony?
I'll talk about it from a supervisor's perspective if you want to talk
Okay.
about the
All
perspective.
right. So, why don't you go first, supervisor perspective, and then I'll add my take.
Okay, so one of the things that I experienced with police officers and working with firefighters, and I just recently did a class for a group of firefighters, and you know, when they started talking, they just had a lot of unresolved things that they just never processed and talked about, and none of their partners in the room realized that they were having a hard time with it. And that was a little, I don't, it wasn't an extreme reaction, but it was emotional, and there were some tears, and You know, these people were all there for each other, and they were all there to support each other. It doesn't have to be that dramatic, though. It could be just we might see them showing up late for work. We might see them not caring about their appearance, as Blanca kind of mentioned earlier. Maybe extreme weight loss or weight gain. Falling asleep at work, because that might be an indication that they're not getting a good night's sleep. Because one of the things, by the way, that the stress hormones causes is sleep disruption. So if they're constantly experiencing chronic stress, they might have some sleep disruption. They may be falling into some of their old behaviors that you saw before. It doesn't have to necessarily be drug or alcohol abuse. It can be, but you know, it could just be engaging in behaviors that are not healthy anymore. Lots of they used to be engaged with their client, and now they just sit around and watch Netflix on their phone. And what's happening, you know? So I guess that all falls under the category of just a change in their normal behavior. And so whatever that baseline behavior was before, we may have gotten somebody that was already in that change portion from their normal behavior. So we have to ask ourselves maybe what was going on there too, and can we help this person in our company through whatever it is that we decide, or however we want to do it. But any of those behavioral changes, short-tempered, not getting along with their coworkers, you know, lots of other things like that, stuff you see sometimes every day.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And what about from your perspective, Blanca?
Pretty much the same thing. It's just, what are those changes in behavior? Are they more irritable, more short, withdrawn? Maybe there's some physical signs, right? They're constantly having maybe, headaches or, just, like I said earlier, maybe noticeable changes in their physical hygiene and their grooming. Um, you know, Performance issues. So there are a lot of and also Tony alluded to the emotional changes, right? So there can be maybe increased anxiety and in that depression where they look really withdrawn, isolating, not, so and it's more noticeable, especially if you have an employee, someone who has normally been more outgoing, very participates in team meetings or just more engaging, and all of a sudden there's this shift. So it's like that's like okay, something's up. So the signs are there, but you just have to you know pay attention to your team members, right? Your officers, and the key is to approach it with care. Not like I said earlier, don't assume that they may be, their deficits in their work performance. There may be something else happening that's contributing to that, to their present day functioning. And, it's kind of pay attention and check in, do those check-ins.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the things that you said, Blanca, earlier that really struck me, I even wrote it down, was our our job in those moments is to offer support, but you can't that there's not a whole lot more you can do besides offer that support.
Hmm.
So this next question came as my little ambassador committee was putting together the questions for this panel. And we'd love your professional take, Blanca, and then Tony, in your experience, if you want to share as well. But what is your professional take on how to flush out what level of support somebody might want?
Well, the key is, like I said, it's don't assume, it's offer, right? So it's opening the conversations to have that dialogue. When you do that starting with that check-in, right, using open-ended questions to have that conversation and then gauge how they're responding, right? If they're, I'm okay, maybe they're not ready to talk about it, and that's okay. Or maybe they will open up and say, hey, I'm having a hard time with my spouse. My kid is being a big pain and whatever it may be, then, you know, you can offer, some resources, and as a company, you know, you may want to start having like, mental health resources or referring them to the employee assistance program, or if there's like a peer group, it's like having those resources accessible and say, hey, just in case, these are some resources that you may benefit from. And, just follow their lead and let that be your guide. You know, it's like, how do you respect those personal boundaries, right? It's like, I know you're coming from a place like, know that you don't have to fix it. Let me put it, you don't have to be the fixer. All you can do is provide the support, the resources, and it's up to the individual to, act on it.
I love that. I think that was put so well. And I even took down some more notes because we've already done a run through chat and I have so many notes from that, but I feel like I'm learning more even now as we go and continue. But I think the two big takeaways there is following their lead and asking those open-ended questions that feels like a step in the right direction. Although I will say, and my legal counsel is on this call right now. Some of my HR brain and the legal side, I'm like, oh, I don't know. We gotta walk this line very, very carefully as members of management, as owner operators. So I know it is a little bit of a balancing act. So Tony, I'd love to hear from your perspective.
Before we
No,
move to Tony, Ashley, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, but I also just fostering that environment that, hey, it's okay to talk about mental health issues here at work or with your team members who you feel comfortable with. Is just also making it like, hey, it's, we could have these conversations. That way they feel safe, because that's important, especially when someone has experienced a trauma. It's their sense of safety is compromised. So if they don't feel safe talking to their supervisor or colleague, they're not going to share. But
yeah.
you can just give them the resources.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really helpful. I'm glad you added that one to the list because I think that's really important. So Tony, same question, but adding on to that, how do we flesh out what level of support someone may want, and how do we identify those boundaries, or what are some tips that maybe you have in that same vein?
Yeah, so from a real practical standpoint, I think one of the things that Blanca alluded to is getting permission to broach some of these subjects, or even to share some of this information that needs to get shared up to managers. I don't remember which conversation it was, but recently we had a situation where a supervisor thought that he was passing on information that was going to be helpful for the managers about something that was going on in one of our employees' lives. And the employee got really upset about it because, oops, okay, I'm having some bandwidth problems here. Hang on 2 seconds. Let me there we go. I think the only thing that we would have done differently there is just ask that employee's permission. Do you mind if I share this? That goes a long way for that. But it also has to be percolated into the culture of the company, just like Blanca said, because that is our message to the rest of the company that we take this seriously and we're going to listen to you. And if we listen to you, we're going to do something about it if that's what you want us to do. It's real important, especially since we have so many owners on the call, that this isn't just supported, but this is also promoted from the top. Because we may have a supervisor that's really passionate about it and gets the support that they need. But until the employees know that it's important to the owners and hear it from them, then it's not going to be important to them, and they're not going to believe it either. So that's one way that I think we approach that subject. I think also, you know, you're going to talk about this a little bit later, but it really goes to this idea that the generational change around mental health is huge. Um, it, the employees now, especially Gen Z employers, they expect you to be talking about this. They expect it. If you're not, then they see that as, you know, your company having less value in some ways. I think in the research, I think it's like I think mental health is in like the top five important things for Gen Z workers, and it even beats out pay. You know, it's important that we're just talking about it throughout the company and socializing it throughout the culture of the company.
Yeah, something that you said that I wrote down, Tony, not just supported but promoted. I think we have so many owner operators in this little group right here. I think it's so important to acknowledge that piece of it, because without that, it's really kind of all in vain. So I think that's a really important point.
And Ashley, if I could add one more one more thing to what Tony said about promoting it, right? It's creating that workplace where your 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 folks feel value while still meeting professional standards, right?
Yeah.
That's important. So as a clinician, I have to do continuing education courses. So I went to my in-house resource and I picked up this book that I know many of you have or are familiar with, because I was curious. I really wanted to know what are some of the trainings that security professionals get. And I was really surprised. Well, not really, that there's really nothing in here about mental health.
Yeah.
But my little brain started spinning, and there's areas where you could incorporate an hour or maybe add it to, like, supervisor to subordinate, worker to worker. This is under your workplace violence module, right? Under anger management. There's
Yeah.
room to add this conversation in your currently in your trainings modules. So just putting it out there for the owners of and team leaders, and as far as like, what can I do? You can create within what you have already a conversation around mental health, just like you did, Ashley. You had something for your employees.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think it's so important. And BSIS, obviously, just with the new slew of legislation that has gone into effect just in the last couple of years, the initial 8 is completely different. Obviously, use of force, appropriate use of force, I should say, has been a big topic, and embedded within that, there's definitely space to start having conversations around mental health. So I'm so glad that you pulled out our president of CalSega calls that the little Bible, the little pink Bible this year. Although I don't know, I haven't gotten my 2025 one. I don't know what color it is yet, but yes, there are different colors every year, Blanca. So I'm so glad that you pulled out that resource. So this next question feels like the other side of the same coin. So we talked about how as employers, can we support our team? The flip side of that coin in my mind is, how do we make space and support team members while balancing expectations and ensuring we're still holding those team members accountable for the work that we have to do? And I'd really love, Tony and or Blanca, whatever your take is on that other side of the same coin.
I,
Yeah,
oh,
go ahead, Blanca.
well, one of the things that I would say is that rather than waiting until their performance declines, where it's declining significantly, is really having those regular conversations that clarifies the goals, the responsibilities, and available support, right? So it's again those check-ins, right? That and align the expectations, right? So I understand you're dealing with a lot right now, and I want to support you, but at the same time, we need to ensure that responsibilities are being met, that you're showing up to your post. So how can we work together on this, right? So kind of collaborate with your officer.
I love that. I think that was a great one-liner. Tony, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I did, because there's we are talking about, and let's just recognize this because there's owners in the room. Okay, this is another thing that I have to do, right? But and so that stress also drops onto you. You are not immune from this stress. You probably, frankly, are the ones that are experiencing most of this stress, the chronic stress anyway. So we have to acknowledge that this isn't just something that we're doing for our employees. This is something that we have to do for ourselves as well. And then we can do it effectively for our employees. Because when you start to see the benefits of this kind of stress management, then you can be a really big advocate for it.
I don't know
And
what you're talking about.
I know, no stress, right, Ashley? Um,
I see Heather just shaking her head like, I don't know what you're saying right now.
I know. I'm gonna walk into that office today, and I know there's gonna be something that's on her desk that she's got to deal with that's causing her. I know this, right? I see it every day. But we don't have to make it a separate thing that we have to do. We can weave it into the culture of how we live as a company and how our employees interact with one another and how we interact with each other. So we may have some individual trainings that we want to do. I have those. I have one in particular if anybody is interested in it. We're, like I said, I'm using it for police officers and fire, but I think it's perfectly good for security too. I think I call the security professionals the firstest responders, because really it is the truth. We are seeing things before anybody else is seeing them. And sometimes we're seeing things that we're not even reporting because we're just handling them.
Yeah.
The police never see them, right?
Yeah.
I think that we shouldn't really, if we're thinking about this as something that we just weave into the culture of our organization, it's not so daunting, that it's another training that we have to do. It's another thing that we have to add on.
Yeah.
This is just the way we are. This is just how we are as a company.
Yeah. Well, and I think that statement and that sentiment really weaves well into this next question. I want to talk a little bit about workplace culture. So, one of the things that you shared, Tony, was this concept of peer support and how that, can really impact a workplace culture in a space like the physical security industry. So, my understanding is that these peer support groups are wildly impactful in first responder industries such as law enforcement and fire. And I'm operating from the understanding that the reason that these are so effective is because often frontline employees might be hesitant to go to a supervisor, an owner, a member of HR, etc. So I'm curious if you can talk, either of you can talk a little bit about maybe the neuroscience or like why that might be the case and help us to kind of unpack why might this be a noteworthy benefit to try to implement? That would, require a lot from us to start something like that up within each of our own companies. And I just want to understand, why has it been so successful, do we think, in these other industries, and maybe how could we replicate that?
Well, peer support programs are they're at the tip of the spear of talking about mental health in emergency response. They are the people that are out there all day, every day, talking about um, about things that have been happening to people, helping them through those things in the way that they can, and then referring them to somebody who is more experienced or has the education when they can't. Because sometimes all somebody needs to do is talk to somebody. They just need to get it out. They just need to verbalize what they're saying. I don't want to say they're okay, but that's what they need at that moment to sort of let the crisis subside a little bit. But more than that, it really sends a message to the rest of the organization that this is important to us. And you're absolutely right. They might not want to go to a supervisor. Their supervisor might not be on board with this. You're not going to have 100% buy-in on this. So if they have somebody who is 100% bought into this, a security guard that works at another site, somebody who's part of that peer response team, that peer support response team, they can call that person and say, "Hey, I'm going through something right now. Do you mind if I talk to you?" Uh, and so it serves kind of multi-purpose. It's functional, but it also serves to sort of change the culture a little bit if it's done properly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so helpful. And when you shared some of the information on our prep call around that, Tony, I was kind of like mind blown. I had no idea that they were so effective. And I know Blanca, you've done some research and kind of some understanding on this as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts too.
Well, I think Tony really hit it on the head, right? It's also I'm familiar with our nephew. He's a captain with LA County, and they have a very active peer support group. So they even have Echo the fire dog, and I know some other fire departments have the, their own therapy dog. But I think, Tony really hit it well in why peer support groups are important. Also individuals might feel safer and comfortable talking to a peer, you know, than a someone in leadership, someone in management. So there's that comfort, or someone who may be performing the same duties is understands more what that individual is going through and are able to have that connection. So it's about safety, and connecting also is really the key in helping with these peer support groups.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that is just so enlightening for me. I hadn't even really considered that. And it does make a lot of sense when you sort of paint that picture and spell it out in that way. So we are almost at time. So I have our closing question. And we really wanted to, as a committee, when we were talking about putting this on the calendar, and obviously all of you took time out of your busy, busy schedules to be here and to engage in this conversation because you recognize that it's important. So, what I want to point to Blanca and Tony for one final wrap up question is, why are we even talking about this? How does not addressing ongoing mental health of our officers impact our companies and our industry in terms of liability, retention, recruitment, right? Like there's so many factors that you could speak to. But I'm just curious what's kind of on the top of each of your respective lists when I ask the question, why are we even talking about this? Why does this feel important? Talking to mostly business owners in this group, I'd love to hear whoever wants to go first.
I'll just say, just quickly, the topic, the conversations around mental health, it's here. It's like, it's in our face, right? It's like those, like I said earlier, those days of like just pushing through, moving through. If you can tough it up, get out of the kitchen, whatever, you want to say, now it's okay to have those conversations. And for many folks, being in a working environment that honors that promotes it, it's like, hey, I not only is my work valued, but my overall well-being is also valued. So it's really just, you know like you touched upon retention. I mean, it's like there's so many different things that contribute to the importance of having these conversations, of making it okay to talk about, and why it's so important.
Yeah, I love that, Blanca.
Yeah, I think if people know that you care about them, then they stay with you. And it really does affect retention. Like I said earlier, the research says that mental health, having a purpose in your work, aligning with the company's value and mental health, those are all among the top 3 or 4 concerns of Gen Z, who, by the way, is the biggest generation in the workforce, or will be entering in the workforce after the baby boomers. Okay, so they're skipping right over Gen X, which is me, and millennials. So they will be the biggest drivers in the workforce. Those are the top priorities for them, even above pay. I think the statistic is it costs in the multiple billions of dollars every year. Mental health issues cost in the multiple billions of dollars every year, in workplace violence, in retention, in turnover, in workers' comp claims. Because one of the things we didn't talk about is that all this chronic stress also affects the body. So somebody who's got chronic stress might also have chronic back pain. And so we might see a workers' comp claim from that. I know that's a difficult subject, and there's more to that. Sorry, Barry and Gary. But you know, this idea of chronic stress affecting your employees really does cost money. It does cost us money as an industry, and that multiple billions of dollars that businesses, you are businesses. It's not some other business that's shouldering this burden. It's all of us too. So I think that's one of the reasons that it's really important to be talking about this.
Yeah, I think, money always grabs folks' attention. And Tony, the statistic that I found was 2 billion annually in projected impact for employers globally with
Global.
relation to mental health. So yeah, I mean it's staggering when you kind of break it down like that and put it into dollars and cents, if you will. So I'm gonna wrap us up. And as per usual, those of you that want to hang out, we're gonna do the networking in just a moment. Don't take off just yet, because I do have one last little nugget, if you will, that I wanted to share with you. We didn't get a chance to dive in and hear live Tony and Blanca's thoughts on this, but in our preparation call, we did talk a little bit about work-life balance. And so I just want to share this with all of you before we wrap up. Again, maybe one more golden nugget, because we talk a lot about setting expectations with regard to air quotes, work-life balance. And some of our industry experts, like the Works Consulting Ann Laguza, has talked about this and shared, kind of her perspective, which is that true work-life balance is not real. Tony shared this really great visual of a teeter-totter example, right? And I think all of that speaks to it's okay to not be okay right now, right? And while we need to make space for that, and we still need to hold folks accountable, this work-life balance piece I think is so important. And the elephant in the room for our industry is we have wild shift patterns, we have irregular working hours, we have exposure to more trauma than somebody working as a grocery store clerk, right? Like we have all of these extras added in. And so when we take all that and then we take it a step further as owner operators, field supervisors, all of us here on this call, executives, administrative folks, right? We operate 24/7, 365. And I think it's just so important for us to have this conversation like Tony shared, and Blanca shared. We have to start at the top, and we have to really start to unpack these things for ourselves if it's going to have a true impact on our teams that we lead. And so we're going to I'm going to work with Kate to try to get you some additional resources sent out via email. But I did want to ask Shayla to share the link from Ann Laguza. It was a really well-written article on work-life balance that when you have a moment, take a look at. Again, I think it's just this is the gateway. This is your gateway drug for mental health, today's coffee chat. That's really what it was, the red pill or the blue pill. But we just wanted to say thank you so much to each and every one of you we as a committee. We want to thank you for being here and having this conversation, because today this is not a requirement of your business, and you have so many requirements and strict rules that you have to consider to operate in the day-to-day. So when you make space to talk about something like mental health that isn't a requirement, it really says a lot about you and how you want to care for your teams. So with that, if you would, all of you, please, you can give like a silent clap. Thank you so much to Blanca and Tony for their time. Really appreciate you guys. You had so much great insight and it was so wonderful to hear your perspectives. We made it through almost all of the questions, you guys. So we did really well. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And for anyone who's able to stick around for the networking breakout sessions, we'll transition to that in just a moment.
Actually,
Yeah.
before we start having people drop off from networking, just in case they can't stay, if anybody wants to continue this conversation, please feel free to reach out to me. I love to talk about it. I love to give people resources and tools. So please feel free to reach out to me. I have a lot of resources. There's our emails and Instagram, and I have a couple of formalized trainings that I could point you towards as well. So happy to keep talking about it.
Thank you so much, Tony. And please follow Blanca on Instagram. She puts out so much great content. I dropped that in the chat as well.
Oh, thanks, Ashley. Thank you, everyone. This was great.
All right. So for those of you that are wanting to stick around, Kate is going to go ahead and teleport us into our respective networking rooms. And I hope everyone has a safe, great rest of your week. See you in a networking room.